Today in the morning, I had summoned enough time to wake up finally, and I got ready within a few minutes, and I got my clothes ready with some fresh pieces, although I was a little bit nervous. I prepared, put on my daily lotion all over my body, and I went with my mom for a quick stop at a McDonald's for breakfast, as much as it is, and she was on work schedule today. For health, I replaced those sausage egg McMuffins with whole grain wheat flour English muffins, and I said no cheese, obviously. That was a few, but ultimately I made it to school on time at approximately 7:50 a.m. in the morning. I had spoken to my counselor about a schedule change for one of my periods, and I'll say something about that later in a different video and he approved a change, which I'll speak about, as I said, in the next one. But nonetheless, I did overhear before I went down to his room. There was a girl in sports who he had a conversation with, but because classes kept switching, there was a struggle because she had to balance her sports time and her credits for that, but also balance with actually having to pass for graduation in core academic subjects. Nonetheless, though, when I got to him, it was an easy period change and it went going. I'll talk about that later. For Spanish, once I got in the class, the teacher gave us our online boleto quiz, and it was mostly about numbers. Using the help of my Italian brain, I managed to finish it and get them mostly correct. And the numbers involved typing them down from number form into written form. And what we did next after that was answer questions about gender agreement in front of the teacher as she presented to us. And we had trouble doing so, and I even hesitated to, but nonetheless, we were able to answer and also highlight other specifics such as nouns, verbs, and the sheet itself are made mostly basic. And next, we're answering two questions about that same worksheet gender agreement, but with an alternative sentence and how it's still correct anyway. The example was two feminine people, but there's two masculine nouns that describe them, for example. And we literally answered these, and we said that it was correct because of this X reason. And the next question was, what person from A to D of food we'd prefer? The class was silent about who to choose here, but eventually, people chose different answers. Some chose Fernando, some chose Juan. But our next project is a presentation on a shirt this time, but it's a printed shirt on paper where we answer 10 questions and decorate that on the shirt itself with symbols, such as a short answer, and then eventually finish this at home, then present it tomorrow. It was like yesterday's project in science, but it's more formal. Next, we repeated some of these questions in class for practice, and one of them was ¿Tienes mascota? Next of this was that we're supposed to present these at least later on tomorrow and whatever we think. So heading down to English, it was pretty hot. Again, it is still summer, so as I entered today is our soapstone practice, and we continued notes for the acronyms. Before ASB made an announcement over the PA about senior sunrise and some sports trials that's going to occur at 3:20 this afternoon. For our paper, she gave her feedback, and it was mostly about formalities and revision that is required. And for soapstone, it's an acronym and an essay that's required for analyzation. So I did my basic stuff, but it was quiet most of the time nonetheless. The teacher even used a few examples. The teacher also asked some kids to turn off their PCs as she noticed, but our first letter asked was about the speaker and what should be known. Next, a letter was a letter A, which is referring to the audience and how we should be saying it. She highlights that it's important to know who the person is. It's important to know that who we're talking to instead of saying a generic everybody. And she emphasizes this heavily for us. Next was P for purpose and the goal behind the text. What's the subject matter and the general topic? Then tone was to see what words were used toward the subject and what manner is conveyed. In a simple fashion, we said that to convey a specific tone, we must enhance our vocabulary. Our prompt was to again redo this and to use these notes to quotes conceptually improve. The teacher said we are to also work with our table partners for this, but I did not work with any. I realized for soapstone though, it can get confusing because it can also refer to the story and prompt itself, but can also refer to us and what we're exactly reviewing, so that it also works for other acronyms. So that is a little bit of confusion. Two students were saying about the story, but other people were saying like this is about us. So 10 minutes later, she gave us proper instructions and the corrections that we have to do, and eventually the class environment was cool, but mostly notes taking and explaining. And I saw a lot of people also sneaking in on a few things, haha. But eventually, I understood it via perspective, and right at the end, I also overheard a boy move seats because my girl had stuff going on the table, so private matters. For period 4, this is the exact same thing as yesterday. We had to finish up our note taking and also finish up the infographic. The class eventually settled down after a little bit and getting in, and I decided to finish up on my work regarding the infographic, though my writing is absolutely massive and the note taking was confusing because there were so many words and exact ideas that are hidden within examples, and tomorrow is also a quiz, so this is going to be a challenge because every single science book has its own word jumble of salad. So having to take notes without any structured guidance, I believe that just kind of tripped me up a little bit here. So I'm going to be doing this later on. But heading down to later, I overheard as I was working a few more things and some deeply complex friend dynamics that I can't say to prevent the drama. But what can be said is that they are my friend, but they dot 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 quote unquote. And I also heard others speaking about the teacher and how eccentric she is for a science teacher, much like the magic school bus. For my work, I had to write notes down and finish concisely on my yellow worksheet. The bad part is that I had to write down the notes myself, but I didn't know what to do. So I just continued on that infographic, decorated the best I can, and did it. I just took a picture of the book to eventually take notes on later. A legend that I also heard was that my teacher said to us back in elementary school, her colorblind friend, who she had then, had a coloring activity that they were doing. But the colorblind friend was using white color, and who then proudly said to her when she was there, "My mom's gonna love this." Later, the kid was taken care of by staff and redirected for his coloring attempts, but she was laughing. Nonetheless, back to the notes today, I was confused because I didn't know exactly what to write other than the definitions and what is, well, highlighted in the book itself, so to speak. But I did talk to a few people here about school and stuff. And also, if you down for lunch, I ate my extra sandwich that I had left from the morning, and I took a bit. But I headed down to another home friend group and one of my friends, Devin. And eventually, I think the thing that I regret doing is that I told him that the library is open. So I talked for a bit with their group before we left, but they all hurried up pretty fast. But later, after a few jokes, we went to the library, and it was hot. Surprisingly, we went upstairs and they played a game, but the teacher didn't allow them upstairs. There's a new updated library rule where games are no longer allowed. So she said this as stern as a pole. So even my friend going outside stated like, "This is going like hell." Quote unquote. And the teacher became even more stern, though he apologized later, and she still remained stern. Even for another boy group too, I believe was using some sort of makeup thing. She was also insistent, saying that they should not be using it and that they're handsome anyway. The boy group reacted crazily for being called handsome by a random woman. Anyways, I did talk in my group in general about life and sports, so it still remained mostly in depth. Credit to Devin, and also credit to a few other people who I've also met along the way. Valentina, I remember now. Anyways, I did tell my friends be careful about word choice after, because that's a little far, so to speak, even though he is technically being accurate about what everyone else is talking about. For period 5, we had bell work today, and it was a basic question about local history in our own area and where we are as it regards to the lesson today. But for period 5, heading down there was hot again, but I managed to make it. And our notes were mostly about Native American people on our land and what we learned. I realized for this class, the teacher does notes in online format. First, we copied down the slide itself, lesson onto our slide. We copied that lesson number onto that same slide document, but put that to the table of contents. Then we're done. Once we have a stamp on the physical notes, we turn it into that same slide document. We learned about the tribesmen and the people who were once here. There was also a video spoken by a young girl, and after was pretty straightforward. Complete the notes, answer the questions, remember at the end of the stamp, upload these notes to our slides to finish it off. Then it went mostly smooth sailing here. I did talk to a partner immediately, so to speak, so it's kind of like a required fastball because the teacher made us speak to a lot of people around us before sharing it in front of the class. But it was pretty interesting, and I learned a little bit about other people. Heading down to period 6, though, most of my friends were talking about planes and airplanes and talking about the design of fighters, such as a Focke Wolf 190 and others, and they're all talking about the specific placements about it. They're talking about how this works and how that works. I used this time to finish up my Spanish project for drawing, even though my friends were pretty funny. I think this is the type of jargon, so to speak, that is pretty advanced, like advanced humor. Like they were talking about specifics, like planes, like how does this thing work? How does this thing work? Are these specific graphics of this given movie trailer, especially War Thunder 2? So I find that pretty funny note to note there, but nonetheless, I'm still having struggles with